Hello, everyone. Welcome back. Welcome back to Black Heart Matters. This is our second session of Black Heart Matters. My name is Tamisha Walker. I am the executive director of the Safe Return Project here in Contra Costa, California. And for those of you who don't know who the Safe Return Project is, we are an organization of formerly incarcerated individuals working to end mass incarceration and mass criminalization of Black people and people of color, and to re-enfranchise communities that have been disenfranchised as a result of criminalization. And so we're really excited today about this Black Heart Matters session because we have some great panelists today, some amazing folks who have been doing some work, and we've been talking about this whole idea around all Black Lives Mattering and how do we center ourselves in solutions to community violence. And so we're super excited about today, and also just co-hosting with DeWanda Joseph and Yanima Healing Circle. So we're super excited about that partnership and being able to do this today because we need to bring that healing aspect in. So before we get started, share, hit like, share, get the word out, invite others, tag people. This is going to be a dynamic conversation, and we will also be able to take on some questions from the live as well as this webinar. So I am going to pass it off to my co-host, DeWanda Joseph.
Good afternoon. I apologize for being late on Zoom. How do you do that? And you're at home, COVID style. So thank you for all showing up today. And I'm going to be very brief. I want to relinquish some time to two of our guests today who are online right now, who are actually at work. So the purpose of showing up here today is we want to talk about the solutions to community violence in our community. There's a lot of talk and there's usually a lot of chatter about what is not happening and how community violence is not being addressed. But based on what I know from my own experiences and the people that we've invited to be on panel today, that is an untruth. And so we're here today to just let everyone know in our community and to hear back from you that Black Lives Matter on all counts, and especially in our neighborhoods that we live in. So we're going to dispel those untruths about us not working in our communities to make our communities safer places to be. We have a great list of panelists, so I just want to jump right in and get to the next phase. I will relinquish my time. My name is DeWanda. I'm the founder of Yanima Healing Circle. We came into existence almost 4 years ago as I was a rapid responder in the community, and that was a void that I saw, that there was no place for people to go to process their own grief and loss. So I'm going to pass this back over. If we want to start with, I know I'm speaking fast. We want to go ahead and start because I know these two people need to get to work.
Yes, so thank you again, DeWanda. And I want to set us up really quick, real fast, because I don't believe in standing the problem. I want to get to the solution. So I want to just put out there some data and some statistics around the cost of violence and violence in communities to kind of dispel the idea around Black on Black crime. Black folks represent 12 to 14% of the American population and commit 52% of the homicides, have committed 52% of the homicides between 1980 and 2008, with 93% of Black victims being killed by other Black folks. That's the data. Whites, excluding Hispanics, represent 62% of the population, and whites commit 45% of the homicides during the same time period, and 84% of the victims of other white folks were white. These numbers are close, but when compared to the percentage of the population, then you can see why we need to address these issues in our community. According to the California Victim of Violent Crime Data, State and Federal Bureau of Limits says that there are limits to being able to support victims of crime. There's inadequate coverage of the actual cost incurred by survivors of homicides. The national median cost of a funeral with a casket is over $7 The cost of an unexpected funeral is a significant financial burden for communities and families. Statewide victims of homicide only received compensation in 2018 of a little over 13 million. Every single gunshot in in our cities, in our local cities, in our local communities costs us a little over $1 million. Every single murder costs us 5 million. And we also need to consider that a little over 397,000 is spent in prosecution and police investigation costs. 3 million in pain and suffering and loss of quality of life for people who were shot in their families. And I also will mention that California has a poverty rate of 14.3%, being the 20th highest in the country. And so we can't talk about this if we don't talk about the lack of resources and the conditions that people live with in our community. And I know that was really fast. And if you have any questions about that data, we could go back there. But just want to let you know that Black on Black crime is not a thing, period. There is neighbor on neighbor violence, and we need to address that. But there's also lack of resources for people to be able to do well and survive in their communities. And so now I'm going to pass it on to an amazing panelist who I really appreciate, and have met her through her efforts. And I would like to know from you, Sanika, to just tell us a little bit about the work you are doing, the work you are doing, and how that lends to community violence solutions and your experience and connections to violence.
All right. Thank you for inviting me today, Tamisha and Ms. D. I really appreciate this opportunity. Well, what led me to this, and actually before this, I was, involved in trying to help curb the violence in our community in Richmond. I was raised there. My family lives there. I worked at Richmond Kaiser as a registered nurse, and so community violence is important to me, but it hit home on August 3rd, 2015. My 21-year-old daughter was murdered as she was leaving for work. She also worked at Richmond Kaiser, and we lived in Vallejo at the time. And she was murdered, and she was murdered by a guy from Richmond. And so since then, I was on a quest to find the killers, but also to let the community know that this kind of thing was not okay, and that in order for us to kind of solve these problems, we have to learn how to stand up and not be scared to speak up when something like this happens. When women and children are not safe, is definitely a big problem. So my efforts immediately following my daughter's murder were, basically getting people to, end the silence, to stop the violence. And then from there, after these guys were apprehended and charged 13 months later, I started a nonprofit organization in my daughter's honor, but, looking back at it now, I feel like I was jumping into things really, really quickly. When you're faced with this kind of thing, when this happens to you, you just want to do something. And so I started this nonprofit organization. I didn't really know where I wanted to take it at the time, but as time progressed, I felt like that mothers and parents of murdered children needed to learn how to heal. And how do we heal? We know that we won't be able to stop violence completely, but it's how do we heal after it has hit home. And so that is kind of where my efforts have been focused since then. In 2017, me and my sisters and some close friends of mine and Miss D, we all went on a journey for healing. We walked the Camino de Santiago. It's a 500-mile pilgrimage across Spain. And so that was one of the things that we did to try to help heal after facing the unimaginable. Did I answer your question, Tamisha?
Yes, you did. And that was it, and it was really interesting to hear you say that you erected something in response to the trauma you experienced and what you saw in the community, and then decided that maybe you moved too hastily. um I know Dewanda has a follow-up question for you, but I want to know what was coming to that realization like, and have you been able uh to continue your journey and the work.
Yeah, well, I came to the realization because I felt like I was getting sick and I really didn't get a chance to deal with my grief. I mean, immediately following her murder, I was looking for killers nonstop for 13 months straight. And I didn't think about self care. And that is one of the things that another mother that had experienced this before me, she and I had a conversation, and she said, Sanika, if you don't take anything else from this conversation, I want you to take this from it. Self-care is important. Don't spread yourself too thin. There's going to be a lot of people that want to talk to you. You have you're making noise, so don't spread yourself too thin, and don't try to do too much too fast. And so that really resonated with me, and I began to do the self-care things. I did the walk in Spain, and then took another vacation or two, and really focused on another very important aspect, which is trying to be present for my remaining child, my son, who was 13 at the time. A lot of times when something like this happens to your family, if they have siblings, you have other children, we're so wrapped up and caught up in the child that has been murdered or hurt, we tend to forget about the our remaining children. And so that is what I focused on, and that helped me heal as well, like just making sure that my son was okay and being really involved in his school and his basketball activities. That kept me that kept me sane, and allow me to heal a little bit more. And we're still fighting this case. The guys were supposed to go to trial, and has been several trial dates scheduled, but it'll be 5 years in 2 weeks since my daughter was murdered. And they are still waiting to go to trial. It was supposed to go in April, but COVID hit and it got canceled. And so now we're scheduled for October of this year. And we're talking about shutdowns and stuff again, so I'm not sure if it's even going to go then. And I don't really feel like at this point that I can completely heal or move forward until that part is taken care of. And then after that, when I'm done dealing with that, then I can try to move forward and figure out how I can help, or where I can help in the community and help other people after they have suffered the unimaginable.
Tanika, you also spoke a little bit about not being silenced anymore, in the silence to stop the violence. You had a rally in Vallejo right after Artie's homicide, and also you're still continuing to work in the community. You did a lot on social media. How did that go? How did you juggle all of that and then still plan this trip that we were on? And now you're looking to take other parents on this same journey.
Yeah, well, I don't know. I don't know where I mustered the energy, the strength, the mind capacity. It's just like you never know how strong you are until being strong is your only option. So you figure it out. You take the punches as they come, and you figure things out as they come. I knew that I had to, for as far as the rally goes, I knew that I had to get the word out there. I knew that I had to get the community support, in which I felt like I had, but I needed to do something, and I needed it to be seen and heard. And so having the Justice for IT rally, it was January. It would have been her 22nd birthday is when we did it. And you know I had to. There weren't very many leads at that time, and we needed people to start talking and tell us what happened. And so that is what kind of drove me to do it. And then what was the second part of your question? I'm sorry.
That social media blitz that you and your family did that create a lot of chatter that helped law enforcement? And
Yes,
how
it
were you attacked on any side of that when you spoke out?
Um, it did generate a lot of buzz. I have over like 5,000 followers on the Justice for IT page, and I never felt like I was attacked. I know a lot of people, and people knew me and knew my family, and so I didn't really feel like I felt like people wanted to help more than they didn't. I even set up my own tip line, and I set up my own $20,000 reward, and people were calling my tip line and telling me things and giving me information. So people, people wanted to talk. People were tired, and they knew what happened was wrong. It was wrong on so many levels, and it was an innocent young woman who was on her way to work who, you know, got targeted and murdered, and it wasn't right. And I think people felt like if it could happen to my family or to my daughter, it could happen to anybody. And you know, that's how you got to get people to realize and to believe. And we just had to stop being silent so that people like the guy who killed my daughter is not allowed back on the streets to hurt anybody else.
I want to thank you because you demonstrated a lot of courage and a lot of heart during that period. I remember when we met in the parking lot in the middle of the night and all the phone calls we've had in between since your daughter's death. And because of who you are and speaking up, I think that freed a lot of people to have the courage to speak out too. So glad you could be here today.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Thank you so much. How can we help? How can we help you? Um, let's make sure that we get Sanika's information out to folks so that we can be a part of helping other folks focus on their healing, so that they can continue the great work around solutions to community violence, but also making sure that folks are getting the healing that they need when they do experience that. So really grateful for Sanika and the work that she's doing. And my heart is constantly in the kneeling position for her and her family. And also just want to point out that she mentioned she had to survive for her surviving child. And that's such a big struggle for some parents. So thank you, thank you, thank you.
You're welcome.
Let's move forward in this panel. We have some more amazing folks to get to. I would like for us to go around and do a round of introductions. Just tell us who you are, what's your affiliation, organization, and what's it. Just after hearing that powerful story from Sanika, what's at the top of your mind right now? And let's start with Robert.
Thank you very much, Tamisha. I'm very happy to be here and be with you today. My name is Robert Rogers. I work for Contra Costa County Supervisor John Joya's office. I'm also a former journalist and reporter, and I'll be sharing some thoughts on that topic today. What's at the top of my mind is that this year and this time in history is so full of tragedy and terrible situations that are befalling so many of us, and at the same time is so ripe with opportunity. Often when the depths are darkest is when we have the greatest opportunities to make significant and fundamental change. And I think that with energy and love, we will all be looking back on the year 2020 as a year where we made significant social progress.
Thank you. Thank you, Robert. Iola. Your name, organization, and what's at the top of your mind right now?
Hi, everyone, and again, thank you for inviting me to participate on this panel today, this webinar. My name is Ayula Mitchell, and I actually don't have an organization. I fly solo, me and Jesus. I have a full-time job where I do healing work. That's not actually my job, but that's what I do. I do work in jails and prisons. I do a lot of healing work with those who have caused harm. And what is on my mind right now is, just like we are not a monolithic people, we are also not a monolithic survivor. We are not monolithic survivors. And as I listened to the sisters who spoke initially, I thought how vastly different our healing journeys are. My family has, and I'm not going to get into my story, but this is just at what's on my mind is I never sought the arrest or conviction of the people who harm my boys. From the onset, my focus was healing for my family. From the onset, my focus was making sure that my 5 children that were still alive were good. And she hit on a very good point, is that there's so much focus on the loss, and you're literally paralyzed with your pain that it's easy for the other children to be neglected. And so for me, my what's on my mind is just how vastly different we are in this healing space, and that is okay, and that we can still be supportive and in space with one another when our healing journeys look so vastly different.
Thank you. Thank you. Brandon, how you doing, brother?
What's going on?
Introduce yourself, name, organization, what's at the top of your mind right now?
My name is Brandon Ruffin. I am with the Richmond Police Department. Although full disclosure, I've been away for a year and some change on injury. But before that, had been at Richmond for about 10 years and had worked all different types of assignments, from our media and POI or information officer spot, all the way to working with gangs, to working your basic patrol bike unit, and of course one of my favorite positions was doing the work with ceasefire. I'm also a photojournalist and do a lot of work in the activist space and talking, telling stories and absorbing stories from marginalized communities and communities that look like the one I grew up in, which was Richmond. I had, sort of a duality in the way I grew up. I, was fortunate my parents put me in a private school, which I think did wonders for me. But I also was a young Black boy growing up in Richmond. I had, all the things that come with that. I had my own anger issues as I was trying to rationalize my way through the irrational, which was I was dealing with family members and friends getting killed. I frequently tell my wife, who's not from this area, that I did not expect to make it to be 25, and to sit here as a 34-year-old man now was completely outside of my realm of thought. I just was used to the way things were. And so I never had internalized it, so to say. I just knew that there was a good chance I would not make it to be into my mid 20s, my late 20s, or even to my 30s. And when I think of Sanika, your experience, first of all, thank you for sharing that with us, because it's, I can't even imagine, as a daughter, as a father of a daughter now, I can't even imagine. But I also remember all the funerals I went to, all the people I had to say goodbye to early, and how I normalized it. And so hearing that story made me think of how normal it was. I knew plenty of women who had been paralyzed or killed, who had been shot, shot in cars and shot at because they were with somebody, or not, just all random types of reasons. So growing up in Richmond, it was like there was no off limits, and you don't really, because you're so used to it, you don't even think about how abnormal it was. And so I thought at later on in my life, I started to think about how normal we had made the abnormal. And it wasn't until, a cousin of mine was murdered, and I ended up finding his body on duty. I found him in an alleyway in Crescent Park. It was a little cousin of mine. And it was I had lost people before then, but that situation was unique because that was like the first time I had like literally found his body just minutes after he had been murdered. And couldn't even recognize him just because of, where he was shot at and everything. I just couldn't even recognize my own family sitting there laid out. And so it took me into a lot, to depression and a few other things. But I remember one of the things that was most significant about that was somebody was giving me their condolences. Somebody I work with was giving me condolences on my cousin. I said, oh, it's just the way it is. It is what it is. I said, you know how it goes. And he said, no, I don't. And he said, that's not just the way it is. And I realized that at that moment that I had been normalizing this really abnormal experience, which was losing people to being murdered. And I would go on, to meet people in different, who grew up differently than me or in like different parts of different neighborhoods or whatever, who had never known anybody who had been murdered, never known anybody some of them didn't even know anybody who had died. Some of them were just experiencing death for the first time with like a grandparent or somebody who lived a life to be in their 80s or 90s. That was their first time experiencing loss from death. Meanwhile, like I had always known it since I was a little kid. Like I remember, just being a child and hearing stories about my little cousin who was a kid who was killed on his dad's lap in Richmond because, somebody shot his dad with a shotgun and didn't care that he was sitting on his dad's lap. And so now still at 34, I still get calls, unfortunately, of people who are either been killed or praying for my friends who I grew up with who have been shot and just praying that they, that against the odds they make it. So I think I think Sanika's story and what puts it on my mind is how horrible that was and is. And then also it puts it into perspective again, how we normalize the abnormal.
Thank you. Thank you for being with us today. And I know that DeWanda has some more specific questions for you moving forward because we know, we all work together on ceasefire in Richmond and that strategy and just having your voice from the perspective of an officer, but also somebody from the community is going to be important when we move forward, right? Because we in the solution, right? We want to be in the solution. And so thank you so much. So we'll be coming back to you. Don't go anywhere. Next, I want to let's pass it off to Sam Vaughn. Introduce yourself, Sam. Name, organization, and just whatever is at the top of your mind right now around Sanika's story and also community violence solutions.
How do you do, everybody? Thanks for having me. Sam Vaughn, Program Manager, City of Richmond's Office of Neighborhood Safety. I think the biggest takeaway that I got from what Sanika was talking about is the fact that
You muted.
I could have swore I hit that button. I apologize. You should have did that for me, host. So I'll start again. Sam Vaughn, Program Manager for the City of Richmond's Office of Neighborhood Safety. The Office of Neighborhood Safety is a non-law enforcement governmental agency whose sole purpose is to reduce and hopefully one day eliminate gun violence within the city of Richmond. I think what Sanika's story gave me is the fact that she's the reason, and many others are the reason that we exist. They're the reason we get up and go to work every single day, because no one should feel that pain. No parent should have to bury their child, and no one should lose a loved one to meaningless, senseless gun violence. So we get up every day because we understand that our neighborhoods have been traumatized. Hurt people hurt people. The most of the men who feel like it's acceptable to deal with their conflict with a firearm are missing the point. They don't see value in themselves, so it's very difficult to see value in someone else if you don't really care about your own life. So what we do is we just try to make sure that the community knows that we love them. And so, and Robert Rogers mentioned this, in this state, in time, in this country, and what we're seeing across this country and what's been going on, I think it's truly important for us to get back to a place to where we're a community. We care for one another, we love on one another, we provide for one another, we look out for one another. I think that's the route that we're going. Richmond is, Richmond is ahead of the game when it comes to that. Although we don't have it down packed yet, but we've seen significant results in the work that we've done over the last 12 years. So we're going to continue that work because we want to make sure that there are other mothers, other fathers, brothers and sisters that don't have to feel the pain that so many people have felt due to gun violence.
Thank you, Sam, and thank you for everything that you all do. I'm a big supporter of the Office of Neighborhood Safety and the model and and the deep work that's done, and how it's also being scaled up nationally and across California as a best practice. And so we're going to come back to you because we want to know more about the strategies of the Office of Neighborhood Safety. And I know that DeWanda has a question, some questions for you as well. Let's go to David. David Muhammad. David, are you on, David? Did we lose David? Oh, David, unmute yourself, brother. David.
You don't. The host has to do it. That's what Sam was trying to say. You don't have the ability yourself.
Well, I got my, I'm working it out. I'm not perfect, So, David, David, can you introduce yourself, please, brother? Name,
Yes, yes.
at the top of your mind right now, especially around Sanika's story and community
Yep.
violence solutions.
So first, let me just say, I would, if anybody else had requested for me to, speak today, I said no, I'm in transit, but Tamisha gave the order, so I had to hear and obey. So excuse that I've been in transit and my connection is a little rough, but I think you all can hear me. My name is David Muhammad. I'm the executive director of the National Institute for Criminal Justice Reform. We're based in Oakland, but work around the country. As many know, I worked for many years in Richmond, including helping to launch the Office of Violence Prevention that eventually turned into the Office of Neighborhood Safety that my friend and partner Devon Bogan ran. And Sam is an extraordinary leader, an extraordinary example of somebody, directly impacted, now leading the city agency to extraordinary success. And then I want to talk about that point. But the reality of, in the city of Oakland and the city of Richmond and many other places, we've seen pretty significant improvements, meaning a significant drop in gun violence when you have people who are credible messengers, who have similar lived experiences, who do this work of life coaching and connecting the folks who are those individuals who are at the highest risk of being involved in violence. But I don't care how much of reduction. In Richmond, it's over 70%. But when a mother loses a child, to her, violence is not down. Right? And until we can eliminate gun violence as an issue, which will take a lot, we still have a lot of work to do, and we can't ultimately call it success, even though there has been tremendous progress. I think what's on top of mind for me right now is the notion of much, much greater investment into these proven strategies. When you have trained, credible messengers, people with similar lived experiences who are engaging, developing relationships, and using their influence to change mindsets and decisions and outcomes, like you have in Richmond with the city agency, but who still needs a lot more resources and investment. In the city of Oakland, where we spend nearly $9.7 million a year on this type of work, that's still just 3% of the police department's budget. And so even though we have proven interventions and strategies to reduce gun violence from a community perspective, we need much, much, much more investment. And we need a much greater parity in terms of paying these individuals, these neighborhood change agents, these life coaches, these outreach workers in whatever city. We need better investment in pay, and we need much more better investment in communities to these families that we are serving. So I'll pause there because I know these are just introductory statements and look forward to a greater discussion in this. But we have proven effective interventions. They need much greater investment.
Thank you so much for joining today, David. And that's what we about today. Like we stayed in a problem for so long, we can't get to the solutions, and there are proven strategies, great models, and also very much needed deep healing happening. So thank you for being here. And let's go to Satish. Introduce yourself, name, organization, what's at the top of your mind right now, and what do you think about community violence solutions from your position?
Good afternoon. Thank you very much for inviting me. My name is Satish Jalipali. I'm with the Contra Costa County District Attorney's Office. For about 6 years, I worked in the Gangs Homicide Unit, and my primary focus was working on cases out of the Richmond area, which is what led to me being involved with Detective Ruffin, Tamisha, and the others through the ceasefire program. I think what's on my mind is that I'm very honored to be here today to be talking to all of you and to hear from all of you. And I think that ceasefire and the work it involved and the efforts we put in together was probably one of the most gratifying and rewarding parts of my job. I want to kind of echo what Robert said as far as these are trying times. These are, we have any number of crises going on, but I think that the foundation in terms of what we've worked on these last few years, the foundation is there to not just solve crimes, not just prosecute crimes, but actually prevent gun violence, prevent murders from happening. And I think that obviously is worth far more than simply solving the crime. I think that unfortunately in my work over the last 20 years, I have heard too many stories from too many mothers like Sanika. Each of them was horrible and tragic in their own way. And so I think that, we have to find a way to lay that foundation and build on it and get to a place where we can have a zero homicide count for the city of Richmond.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And I know we definitely have more questions for you, just about the particulars of how ceasefire, your work with ceasefire in Richmond was coming from DeWanda. And so with the time that we have before DeWanda steps in and takes over and asks you guys some of the really tough questions, because that's important too, right? When we're doing this work, we have to ask the tough questions. I would like to go back to Ayula and just really ask you about the healing work that has been happening in the prisons, and why that work was so important to you to be doing.
I came to well, first of all, I've been working in the punishment system for over 35 years. I've worked in many capacities as an investigator with the Public Defender's Office, as a private investigator, as doing mitigation work with death row inmates appeals, as a counselor with juvenile hall. So I come from a wide range of experience working in the punishment system. And I also grew up in a family of law enforcement. So I have this very unique background, both personally and professionally. And then 11 years ago, my family was directly impacted by harm. And within a less than 5-year period of time, my oldest son survived 17 gunshot wounds. My middle son was murdered, and my godson was killed by a drunk driver. And so for me, this work, that's when it became even more personal. But I also knew that incarceration wasn't working. Over-incarceration wasn't working either. And as I was driving to the hospital the night my oldest son was shot, not having any information other than he had been shot, I was praying for my son, and I began praying for the shooter. And people ask me all the time, why were you praying for the shooter? And my answer is always because as I was driving, because of the work that I've done, I was thinking, what happened? What happened to someone how do people go from being an infant to a toddler to school age to a teen to a shooter? What happened in their lives? What harm did they see? did they experience? What trauma went unhealed and unprocessed that now you harm other people? And as one of the gentlemen said previously, it's not valuing your own life. And so that began my healing journey. Once those traumas and tragedies happened to my family, I began going into San Quentin, speaking in circles as a survivor. And that's really how I began doing the healing work for myself, but also with the men and women who I work with behind the walls. And that's so important, is not making excuses for behavior, but understanding behavior. And in, like I said, 35 plus years working in the punishment system, literally hundreds and hundreds of men and women whose legal teams I've worked on, hundreds and hundreds of stories that I've heard of harm that they either experienced or they witnessed. I recently worked with a man who spent 30 years on death row, and then his sentence was commuted to 25 to life. As I was working with him, doing his healing work, getting him ready for the board, he had witnessed 10 murders by the time he was 10 years old. So just think about that for a moment. You've witnessed, not heard about, not know about, you witnessed 10 murders before the age of 10. And so there are thousands of stories like that of pain and of trauma and of harm that goes unhealed and unprocessed and untreated. And so then what happens? It manifests in some kind of way, and oftentimes it is in becoming violent. And that's the work that I do behind the walls of prisons. I've been blessed to be able to go all over the country, working with people directly and indirectly behind the walls, as well as my work here in California and in the county jail, where we really are unpacking their histories, their stories, and helping them to understand how they became violent. I share my story of the harm that my family experienced, and that helps the men and women that I work with become more empathetic and more understanding of what it's like to be a survivor, what it's like to bury your child, what it's like there was 15 months between my oldest son being shot and my middle son dying. And what was that like for me as a mom, for the siblings, for the family, even for our community? And so that's the work that I'm doing.
Thank you. It's healing on both ends, because I know DeWanda is doing some great work in the communities with the families. But we often forget, right? As a formerly incarcerated convicted person myself, like knowing what it feels like to have folks come behind the walls and invest in being with you and figuring out how did you get to where you are, and where do you want to go from here, is so important. Because most of us are coming back home, but even for those who aren't, they still have families in the community. So I think that's really important. I want to go back to Sam, because I also know that DeWanda has a question for him, but I want to know, can you tell people a little bit more about the interworks of the Office of Neighborhood Safety and what you all are experiencing right now? Because I know that your program is constantly under attack by the city council. And then I also think DeWanda had a question. DeWanda, you want to throw your question out there too? That way Sam could just answer it all in one while.
I think the question I'm going to ask will maybe a few people might want to respond to it, because when I'm listening, and what I know is that we talk about aspects of healing, and then the trauma that a person has experienced prior to whatever they're done to get them involved with all of us. Where's the mental health aspect in that, and what are we doing at an earlier age versus catching people behind the wall? Is there something we can do to shift this, where we can be some intervening prior to the possible picking up of a weapon and committing an offense against someone else? Because I don't hear much about mental health screenings that are having professionals sit down with people to go through, even when they're getting into programs, possibly ONS, I don't know. That was one of the questions. Is there a mental health screening by a paraprofessional or a professional mental health provider to help to kind of draw a treatment plan for the people that become a part of that program?
Yeah, so Sam, just let us know more about the model and then yeah, what's going on right now and how can we support?
So let me make sure I'm off mute. All right. So so the model literally came from data. Like we really try to allow data to drive our motivations and our strategies. And what we were learning is a majority, like I said, we opened up in 2007. Outreach staff hit the ground in 2008. And as we were plugging along, just trying to be known, build relationships, let the community know who we were, what we were trying to do, what we were about, what resources we had available. There was a lot of need, and for the most part, there was a lot of folks who were saying a lot of different things about what was driving gun violence in the city of Richmond. And we were getting involved in all of those things, and we were spreading ourselves very, very thin. And so as we would continue to do that work, we realized that there was a very small population of individuals who were creating a very large amount of the numbers that was driving the gun violence in the city of Richmond. I believe one person had said literally there was 21 individuals in the city of Richmond in 2009 that were responsible indirectly or directly for 70% of the shootings and homicides that happened in the city. So the idea came to, why don't we just engage those 21 individuals much differently? Once we did our math and our research, it was 28. We counted that as 28, not 21. And we engaged them differently. We started a fellowship. And what the fellowship consisted of was initially just engagement and building a relationship with us. And then once you can build a little trust where you can have an honest conversation with someone, then we did a life map is what we called it. And it's literally just trying to get someone to start thinking about their future. And believe it or not, most of the young people in Richmond, and I'm going to say this, not just the young folks we were dealing with, but most young people in Richmond do not see a future. And so because they don't see it, they don't plan for it. And so when you start talking about SMART goals and 6-month goals and goals for a year and where you want to be in 5 years, they've never really gave it any thought. And so they're not planning for it because they just happy, I don't know if I'm gonna be alive tomorrow. So I go to sleep, I'm grateful I ain't dead. I wake up in the morning and I just try to stay alive today. And that's their whole purpose of life. And to try to get them out of that. So get them to start thinking about a future, and then letting them know that that future is absolutely attainable, and everything that you need to obtain that future is in you and in us. We have the resources. You have to have the will and the desire, and to be able to accomplish it. And so with that, we start getting them help. What did you say you needed? Okay, we try to find organizations that can do it for you. But instead of just sending them there, because folks ain't gonna go, and if they do go, they don't know how to answer questions that are given them. They don't know how to filter the answers that's given to them. And so we go with them, just like any good parent. You wouldn't just send your child to the doctor, and then when they come back, you ask them, okay, what did the doctor say? No, you go to the doctor with them. You go to their college counselor with them. You do these things with them. So we'll walk them in there and hold them accountable to what they're saying they want to do, but then also hold the organization accountable to do exactly what they say they're going to do for that person or that individual. We put them around a group of elders so they can see someone who's dealt with things similar that they have, and they can possibly see a future. Like when you got a 65-year-old retired ophthalmologist and they're saying, yeah, it's rough. It was tough going to school. I wanted to quit. Or yeah, it was tough and I had to get a divorce 4 times. But I'm still kicking and I'm still making my life the best I possibly can. And then to allow them to travel, allow them to see something that they've never seen before. It's amazing, like when you're in Richmond with a fellow, and you're standing out there in their community and you're talking with them, you don't really have all of their attention, and you shouldn't, because they're making sure they're paying attention to everything that's going on around them. I don't want them to focus on me so much that they didn't pay attention to that car circling twice. Then the third time they come by, they're shooting. So you don't really get the real attention that you need if you're just out in the community talking to a young person, because they're on heightened alert at any given time. They can be attacked. So traveling with them and letting them get outside of their comfort zone, or excuse me, of their war zone, and to be able to be in a place to where they can feel comfortable and they're not worried about hearing a car engine rev up. Or nobody knows them in Seattle. Nobody knows them in Manhattan. So they can just relax and exhale and enjoy that moment. And they get to go with somebody that they normally would never be around, because it would be somebody from another part of town, to try to get them to understand the humanity of one another. And then we try to do job development, resource development to be able to get them jobs. We do paid internships. We do subsidized employment, just so they can understand, like, a lot of them say, this is what I want to do. But because they don't even really know what's entailed with that job, they get on the job for 2 weeks and like, oh no, that's too much. I ain't never trying to do that again. So getting them some experience so they know how to invest in themselves and do something that they can possibly do for 25 or 30 years until they get a retirement. But I do believe the biggest aspect of the work that we do is we show them the value of their life, long before they themselves. And sometimes we put the value in them for years before they even see any value in themselves, because it's been a lot of years where they've been devalued. It's been nobody. I'm sorry, I can't remember the name of the lady who's going into San Quentin, but she said it very clearly. Like, Ayula, when you're 10 years old and you've seen 10 people dead, you're kind of desensitized. If not, you're going to go crazy. Because if you don't desensitize yourself, like, that's too much for a child to deal with. Like, you're seeing demons every time you go to sleep. So you have to stop caring just to survive. It's a survival mechanism. And so we try to defunct that survival mechanism.
How many of your folks actually get like mental health services?
All of them. And we're psychiatrists, like, and I know that's not what a lot of folks are talking about, and I get it, but they don't trust anyone. So no one's going to go and open their heart and emotions to a stranger at all. And mental health is taboo in the Black community. So we have to disguise it. It's kind of like, putting cheese on vegetables. That's the only way my child will eat them. And so we have to make it palatable for them to
And
be
I
able to
know
accept.
y'all work with a lot of mental health professionals,
Yeah, and they give us
you all get a lot of training from real mental health professionals on how to approach this. What's the annual budget of the office a year?
Well, the annual budget is roughly 1.4. They had just raised it right before the budget cycle ended. They had just gave us extra $230,000 to add 2 new NCAs to staff, which was amazing, and we were grateful, especially in these fiscal times. But I think the reasoning was, like everybody's talking about, we have to reimagine public safety. We have to reimagine what we can do with resources, especially when those resources are minimal, and get the biggest effect. And the council felt that the office is giving a great effect with minimal resources. But now tomorrow they put an agenda item on for tomorrow to take those funds back. So it's pretty deflating. For 3 weeks, I was just really excited about what are we going to do with these resources. These 2 people are going to make a huge difference in this community, and we've already made a huge difference. Since 2007, we've had a reduction of shootings that led to injury or death by 82%. There isn't a community in this country that has reduced gun violence by 82% in the last 10 years, and we've done that. And we've been effective at keeping that reduction over the years. And so I don't know why they're trying to take it back. We'll have that discussion tomorrow at City Council. I'm going to try to fight my hardest to keep those 2 positions because we need them. The city of Richmond needs them, and we're gonna be doing a lot of good work with those 2 people. So
Well, people, thank you, Sam. Folks, if you're on this webinar or you're on Facebook Live and you're a Richmond resident and we're talking about defund the police, put that money into programs and real community violence solutions, I would suggest that you call into the city council meeting tomorrow. Do not let this very valuable program that is not perfect, right? Because no program is perfect. Um, don't let the budget for the Office of Neighborhood Safety be cut. Um, it's going backwards from what we want and what we want to see. So thank you so much, Sam. And we'll be sending an email out with that information to support you all. Really appreciate the Office of Neighborhood Safety. And I also just want to raise up, because I know folks are saying like, well, what if somebody go through the program and they still shoot somebody? Well, um, some get it, some don't, some will, some won't, but you give it to everybody, right? I've seen no program that's had 100% success rate. Even our organization, we have had people re-offend, and I know it's not the same, but we have to give credit where credit is due. Back to the solutions and the programs. Let's go to David. David, can you tell us a little bit about, in like maybe 3 to 5 minutes, tell us a little bit about that work, how it's being scaled up, what other cities, how much is cost, because we can't talk about this without talking about the financial need, and what how do other people get resources to their communities to do this kind of work?
Yeah. First, I want to just share a principle that's incredibly important when talking about this work. And it's incredibly simple, but far too many jurisdictions get this wrong, which is clearly understanding that your actions have to be aligned with your desired outcomes. And even though that might sound obvious, what I find doing this work around the country, I have the pleasure and the pain of doing this work, working with jurisdictions around the country, where I'll inevitably find, for instance, a city that says, we want to reduce gun violence in the next 12 months, and we're going to launch a mentoring program for middle school students in order to do that. And while a mentoring program for middle school students is great, it will never get you gun violence reduction in the next 12 months. So we have to understand what activities, what programs, what strategies produce which results. And so, for instance, we need community beautification, we need community transformation, right? There's a reason why Point Richmond doesn't need the Operation Peacemaker Fellowship. There's a reason why Piedmont in Oakland doesn't need ceasefire, right? There's a reason why there's certain neighborhoods in cities, even in Baltimore, even in Chicago, there's neighborhoods that don't need intensive violence intervention. And that's because they have investments at a different level. They get government services at a different level. And so I want East Oakland not to need it. I want North Richmond and Central Richmond not to need it. But the problem is we are far from that, right? And while we have to have people who work on community transformation, we also have to do the very intensive, important work that people like Sam and the Office of Neighborhood Safety are doing is right now, stopping the shootings right this second. And so in order to do that, we need proper investment, and we need to invest in the individuals who have the specialty and the expertise to do this work, right? And so in Oakland, the average take-home pay of a police officer is about $125,000, $130,000 a year. And we need to be able, even if you talk about just the base salary, we have to pay our intervention workers, our interrupters, our outreach workers, our life coaches, our neighborhood change agents, that type of investment. And so in Oakland, where voters approved an initiative called Measure Z, it was Measure Y at first, that spends about $9.7 million a year in violence reduction initiatives. And that is probably the largest per capita investment in the country in this type of work. It still pales in comparison. As I said earlier, that's up 3% of the police department's budget. So the last thing I want to say here is an example. There was a researcher named Patrick Sharkey who wrote an article in the Washington Post who looked at Washington, D.C. through the lens that I'm referencing. And he said, the police department beats are broken down to something called police service areas. And the police have about 70 personnel and spend about $10 million in each one of these PSAs have about 12,000 people. And so if we were spending $10 million on intervention services per 12,000 people, we would be able to produce far greater outcomes in terms of reductions in shootings and incidents of violence. And that doesn't necessarily have to be competitive or taking funds from this or that, but it means real investment in the intervention strategies that work, while we also figure out how do we best spend government dollars. And this is a nuanced conversation. There's not a cut and dry. There's real pain in our communities, and we have Black mothers who want intervention into the reality of their babies being killed. And as we've heard on this call, there's different ways in which people want intervention, which is completely fine. We have to understand all of it. But the other good thing is we know what works, and we have to better invest in what works. Very lastly is my organization has done a series of assessments of the cost of gun violence. If you go to the costofviolence.org, costofviolence.org, you'll see all of the reports, all of the assessments we've done around the country. And on average, it's about $1 million. That doesn't include California. California's on average $2 million. But on average, nationally, about $1 million for every injury shooting. When you have police response, ambulance response, fire EMT response, often DA investigators response, you have a hospitalization, an incarceration, a trial. When you take all those government costs, and that doesn't even include the non-direct costs, that some estimates go up to $10 million for shootings. We invest the money already, but we invested in the wrong things. We need to invest in upfront intervention, interruption services, so that we can have the type of success, yes, that Richmond and other cities have begun to experience, that we need to sustain and even improve. And so this is the type of political will that we have to create in these cities for better investment.
Thank you so much, David. Yeah, please go to that. Early on in the conversation, we shared some data around the cost of violence. And so, yes, please go to that website, thecostofviolence.org. We also shared some real data around, because we're saying like all Black lives do matter. Black on Black crime is not a thing, period. And that white people kill each other at the same rates as Black folks, right? And so, but we definitely, because we have smaller numbers, have to really address this issue from a solution standpoint, and be able to think about healing. So I am now going to pass it off to my gracious co-host, DeWanda Joseph, who has been doing some amazing work and has some questions for the rest of the panel. And I think Robert, I think the next question was going to be for Robert, but I'll pass it off to DeWanda now. And thank you all so much, and I will be back to close us out.
Well, I want to thank you for all the information I just heard. It leaves me pondering the question, how much does it cost for a family to heal after the shots have been fired? As a family member that's a survivor of gun violence and still seeing the detriment that it's had on my family, that's my high concern. I'm just going to go over to Robert Rogers quickly, because I read some of your articles back from 2012, and you had interviewed a few offenders, and I think you talked to a parent and a grandparent of one of the young offenders right after his court date. I appreciate what I read because it gave a full story of a person, a whole person. And I wanted to ask, did you ever have the opportunity to interview a surviving family member? Robert, are you there?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you very much, DeWanda, for the great question. And the answer is yes. And I'll preface that by saying, I think that we all must understand, and sometimes we forget, especially people working in governmental institutions or in the media, both of which I've been a member of, that at a fundamental level, we all need someone to listen to us. We all need someone to hear us when we're in a time of pain or sorrow, to let us know that our pain matters. We have to remind ourselves of this always. And I try to remind myself of this always. And I did when I worked as a reporter. And quick story, it was several years ago that I met an incredible young man. And he was working in a county program at a garden in North Richmond. And he was 21 years old. And he was a delightful person to speak with one-on-one. But more important, you could see that he had a level of leadership, a self-possession that showed clearly he was someone who saw a bigger picture and to whom people gravitated and looked to for leadership. He was well respected. And one night, after leaving the farm, the garden that he worked at as part of a county program, he was senselessly killed while he was on his way home. And his name was Irvin Coley III, and he was 21 years old. Soon after this terrible, tragic death, I was working as a reporter, and I went and spoke with his mother, who lived in the Los Deltas housing projects that are no longer there. And when I went there, she was looking through her old photo albums and other reminiscences that she could use to kind of touch upon the life that she was still in shock about losing. And my assignment was to go there and to get information and be able to tell a story about what happened. But I had to put that aside, and I had to rediscover who I was as a person and to be human, because that's really the most important thing. And I told her how sorry I was for her loss, and I asked her if she wanted to talk. And we talked all afternoon. And there were a series of articles and stories that we told together afterward that helped her with her healing and helped the public and the community with understanding the cost of senseless street violence. There's been some really important points that have been mentioned by some of the other panelists here that I appreciate so greatly. Brandon talked about normalizing of abnormal experiences. Sam talks about the desensitization of this violence. These things occur constantly to all of us as we're trying to do this important work and save lives. And we always have to remain on guard and not let those things happen to us. That's why the media and other people who may intersect with us when we have episodes of violence or loss or tragedy are important, because we can never allow these kinds of things to be normalized. And one way to not do that is to not let them, when we lose a young, brilliant, boundless, incredible life to senseless violence, it can't just be a blurb on the news or a blurb in the paper or something that so many people forget. In other communities across the country, when other people, maybe in more affluent communities, lose their lives senselessly, that's not normalized. That's seen as a really terrible, tragic thing by so many. We have to ensure that every life in our community is sacred and can't be lost without a tremendous reevaluation and a hurt by our collective community, so that we can all reinforce and work harder to ensure that it doesn't happen again. So in short, I would say that what's really crucial is that we have to constantly reconnect with who we are in our humanity as we do our professional work, because our humanity is what makes the work work and what gives us the strength to go on. And lastly, I just like to make a point about empowerment and social media and other tools. 20 years ago, we as members of the public, maybe families touched by violence and so forth, we had very little in terms of a larger voice to a larger community. We could hope that we got on the evening news or got in front of a camera. We would hope that we'd be able to share our story. But now, any of us can get on Zoom or get on Facebook or Twitter or anything else, and we can share our stories, and we can make sure that what happens in our community is not given short shrift or not put at the back of the newscast. We can take control of our story and make ourselves heard. And that's a powerful thing. But we can only do so if we're always on guard against things like normalization or desensitization to the kinds of violence that we're working to stop. So again, the answer, of course, is short as yes. And there are many other stories that figure into this as well. And I have to remind myself constantly that everyone wants to be heard, and everyone deserves someone to lean on when they're in a time. And we should all play that role whenever we can.
I want to thank you for how you have responded, but also for all the work that you've done in the community and how you continue to show up in the city of Richmond, and also as a humanitarian who tells the full story and just not like a blur that shows just the offense, but also the whole person on both sides. You have been fair to both sides, and I appreciate that. Thank you so much for joining us today. Brandon, are you there?
DeWanda, you know I'd never go anywhere without asking your permission first.
Oh, come on. You went on leave and I didn't even know you had been gone all that time, even though I continue to page and look for you. I've lost communication with my contact, and, that's a little frustrating. I really miss having the connection that I had with Richmond PD, and I'm still trying to reestablish that. But I wanted to ask you and for your thoughts on why we kind of drifted away from the ceasefire movement that was taking place in Richmond, working directly with like some of the people that went to ONS. We worked with some of the people on probation and continued to kind of follow them along with some of the ONS fellows that were on the same list that we got. What happened? And why aren't we back actively doing that?
That's a good question. I've always been, I won't say I was in the minority, because I can't speak for other people who work there. But for me, there was a personal connection to ceasefire, and there was a personal connection with ONS. I mean, I wasn't dealing directly with them, but I knew all the guys from ONS. They all knew me, and there was a level of respect that was always maintained. And then to work with ceasefire, the same thing. I think a lot of times, because many times I had family members that were on one side of that. They were either a victim of a homicide or they were someone who we were working with to make sure that they weren't perpetrating any homicides or gun violence or things like that. And so I think growing up with family members who have gone off to do, some really amazing things, start a business or get involved in the tech industry or whatever. And also having family members who were still in Richmond, who were still, other side of my family on the other side of the country is from Chicago and Detroit. So I was constantly dealing with this duality of loss and this duality of wanting others to be able to do better for themselves, to break out of these systemic systemic cycles that kind of just kept them in bad spots. And so I really appreciated what both ONS and ceasefire meant to a community like Richmond, because I can tell you right now, not all my colleagues grew up like I did. And so I personally knew what those losses felt like. I knew what it felt like to, want to go out and take action. I knew what it felt like to be a young man, a child, and in the beginning of it, and wanting to feel like your actions are making somebody's life matter. And thankfully, I had a lot of guidance from, sometimes, if it was a friend of mine or a cousin or something like that, like somebody who said, like, look, there's nothing that you can do besides live your life, live it well, and go out and tell these stories and be a part of the solution that can honor someone who's gone. And that's the truth. And so I really always had a great love for what ONS and ceasefire meant to the city of Richmond, because I knew what it looked like before those organizations had started. You know, I remember I saw my first dead body. I saw somebody who had been murdered before the police had got there. I was 10 years old. You know, and this was a horrific sight. Like what I saw was bad. And so I just remember, like, these are the early memories I have, dealing with violence and dealing with, you know, is violence acceptable or not? You know, if somebody does something to you, what do you do next? How do you even survive in these spaces so that people don't feel like you're going to make a good, you know, a good victim to be brutalized or for violence to find you? I remember trying to negotiate these things in my head, like, who do I want to be? And how do I want to handle myself? How do I want to present myself here in Richmond? What do I need to be to make sure that I'm keeping myself safe and keeping my family safe and my siblings? And again, it leads me back to my appreciation I have for what ceasefire and ONS meant to a place like Richmond. I think that when you talk about the disconnectedness between those organizations now, with Richmond PD, I think that a huge part of it has to do with people who are in different places of leadership at the time and the support that they can also garner from the people that work under them. Are people going to be going out and working in these positions with truly believing in them, truly believing in the mission? Because without that, it's difficult work. Everybody who's here right now can attest to how difficult it is to work in these environments. And by in these environments, I don't just mean the actual, you know, boundaries of the city itself, but to care about, you know, obviously most of our work centered around young men, and I know for a fact the ONS, most of their work centers around young men, young Black men in Richmond. To be committed to that work and be there, and to watch more men go to prison, watch more people you care about and you love and you've invested and you've seen the little parts of them they don't show everybody else be killed. You know, it's exhausting. And so if you take someone and you put them in these positions and they don't believe in it in the first place, then they're not going to be committed into maintaining any type of connection. They're not going to be committed to maintaining the work. I also think that it's important that the people who are involved in maintaining the work have been impacted by the lack of that work. So for me, I was interested and committed to ceasefire because I knew exactly what it meant when organizations like ceasefire weren't around, you know. And also, I during many of our ceasefire meetings, I remember telling you guys, like, you know, I'm probably the youngest person at this table. Therefore, if you talk about statistics, I was the closest to the violence that was actually going on. And so while, you know, some of the folks that who are in these organizations are still in these organizations, while they were dealing with the loss of family members, like sons and nephews and nieces and daughters, as they were dealing with it as adults, I was dealing with it as a teenager or a young adult, which means statistically I was in a high chance of making bad decisions as a result of these things. Mm-hmm. You know, and the anger and the hurt and the pain that I had to deal with when these situations occurred were still being, if you think about like my maturity being a liver, like how these things were being digested by my psyche, right? Psychologically, how was I dealing with these things and these traumas? It wasn't the most matured way yet. I was still, you know, even when I became a police officer at 22, I was a child and was still dealing with the things that many of the guys I was out interacting with and trying to work with these programs, we were the same age. Some of these guys I had grew up with. Some of them I was related to, you know, and so it was even more hurtful when I would see somebody go back to jail. It was even more hurtful when, you know, I would see somebody who was involved in these programs get killed. But there was an investment to me because I knew whether I was involved with the police department or not, or whether I was involved with the program or not, I was going to have to deal with the results of what was happening in the city of Richmond, you know, and so for me, there was an investment. I can't say that everyone who has been in that role or everyone who was trying to, or who was tasked with maintaining the relationships there had that same type of investment, because the risk, or the cost, I should say, wasn't the same to them. For me, the cost was, if these programs aren't in place, more people who look like me, who grew up like me, or who I know are going to die. And so when you don't, so for me, it was a personal investment, because to me the cost was personal. I wasn't going to just drive home and then be away from whatever happens. No, if I felt like if I wasn't doing the work and if we weren't doing the work and people who thought like us weren't out doing the work to attack this problem, that I was going to have to continue to live with those phone calls that I still get today. Hey, so-and-so's been shot. And then, you know, and I'm tired of it. At 34, I'm tired of it. And I hate to tell, I just spoke with a young man a few weeks back who had just lost a friend, his best friend. And I had to tell him, man, you know, I'm 34 and I still get the call. I know how it feels. But it's so tiring. And so I think if you haven't met that level of being tired, you know, I have been shot at before, a few times before I was, you know, have been, you know, gone to college and left Richmond. There was times where I came back from college, I had been, you know, with people who were being shot at. So when you don't know what that feels like, you can't be invested in it. And I think that if people approach these things, even if they haven't necessarily experienced it, if you approach it with empathy and you at least for just a second think about what it feels like to be involved in that, then you can come around. And if you truly try, you can. But I think when you just naturally come from it, you get it. There was never a question to me of why an ONS or a ceasefire needed to exist, because I knew what it looked like when it didn't. You know.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I appreciate that, Brandon. Thank you. I wanted to ask Jolly Polly, who had worked with the ceasefire, sat at the table for quite some time. What is your perception today versus starting in 2011 when ceasefire began around decreasing gun violence and the number of cases you may be working on today as this cycle still continues? Have you seen some shifts in anything coming out of West Contra Costa County in specific?
So I've been kind of in and out of the loop. I'm in the homicide unit, but I'm not specifically focused on the West County gang cases like I was a couple of years ago. Just kind of, you know, talking to officers that I still keep in touch with. It does seem like the trend has stayed down. It had some blips here and there where it went back up. But it does seem like a lot of the work through ceasefire and other programs did seem to have a sustainable impact on reducing the gun violence. But again, it has gone up and down. I think it's been very low this year, although there's obviously other stuff going on in terms of the pandemic that has probably had an effect too. But it does seem like there's been some sustainable reduction.
Thank you. It looks to me that we should be then, if the gun violence is being reduced at some points or another, that maybe we can start to look at also the funding that goes out for restorative justice, as Ayula mentioned, and also a question that came in from Mr. Cooper talking about interventions at the elementary and middle school age, that as we look at solutions, we go back and begin to educate our children at an earlier age in order to prevent these same cycles from occurring. Do you guys, anybody agree with that or think that's a feasible solution as we continue forward?
Can I jump in and respond to that?
Go ahead.
Thank you. I think interventions at the middle school and elementary school levels are imperative and essential. That if we can get restorative justice, real restorative justice into the schools, if we can get people from the community, like the organizations you talked about, into the schools, that's early intervention. One of the big, I had a conversation a couple of weeks ago about police officers, armed police officers in schools these days. And what does that do in terms of now teachers don't have to do any interventions because they can just call for the resource officer, which ratchets up consequences and disciplines, particularly for Black and brown kids. So I think that if we can get programs, and I'm always talking about quality programs because Lord knows there's enough garbage programs out there, but quality programs into the schools, that is an excellent way of doing early intervention. And as the brother Brandon said, people who are from the community, who know what it's like to grow up in those communities, who know what it's like to have those choices and the things that you face when you live in communities like we live in, that's really important.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you. This been amazing. This was super amazing. I want to say to Satish that like I'm looking forward to being able to work more closely with the district attorney's office in East Contra Costa. Also looking forward to working more with David Muhammad in East Contra Costa. We have had an increase and gun violence out this way, and we have not seen support for programs, and we have not seen the level of support that we need from the district attorney's office to be able to organize our local governments and programs to be able to look at this kind of violence and do healing here in East County. And I'm so grateful to Dewanda and Yanima Healing Circle for always being here and coming all the way out this way to East Contra Costa, particularly to Antioch, to think about how we can do healing here as well. All of our communities of Black people are impacted in so many ways. And so I think all Black lives do matter, and everyone has a specific focus and a lane, and that's what makes our work successful. The Office of Neighborhood Safety has been started to do work in the schools last year, and we should continue to support them in the schools and also get more healing practices for young people during this pandemic. And so I'm just super excited about this discussion today. Everybody on Facebook, thank you for joining. If you joined the webinar, thank you for joining. Go talk to somebody else about this conversation. How can you do community violence solutions in your community? How can we get out of the problem and into the solutions and start to think about healing? And how can we support some of these efforts? And thank you, Robert, for always doing credible reporting and making sure that we include the voices of everybody in the community, and from a perspective that tells the real story and not just the sound bites. So I appreciate everybody. This is not the action, this is just the call. And we really appreciate it. Stay tuned for our next series of Black Hurt Matters, where we hope to have more discussion around the Black community. And I'm going to pass it to Dewanda for any last words.
Just want to thank you all for being here. And as I was listening to each one of you, I'm thinking about a vase. You know, it takes hands-on to create a vase. It starts as a lump of clay, and you have to sit and spin a wheel and apply waters to get the texture of the clay pliable. So, and it's a process. Everything that we're doing here to bring a healing and a change in our community is a process. It's hands-on. So we need hands-on. I want to thank you all for being here, for sharing with us today. I got a lot out of this conversation myself as one who has been called into this, I call it my ministry, due to a death of a loved one in my family. And I've been here since 2011, and I haven't stopped. And I don't intend to stop because I know it's a process. But the healing has to begin with our whole community. We just can't look at the people that are offenders. We have to look at the issues that has caused the whole family, from a youth at 10 years old seeing a body on the street until that youth who picks up a gun and becomes an offender. But if we can help with some healing on the way, maybe that can save the whole family. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Follow Safe Return on Facebook. You could go to our website at www.safereturnprj.org. You could also look up a lot of these different organizations and get in touch. Also follow us on Instagram at Safe Return Team. Black Hurt Matters. All Black Lives Matter. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.